Hello everyone, you welcome to this edition of The Inside. I am Babla Jonathan. Sub-Saharan Africa faces a critical unemployment challenge with roughly one-third of its over 420 million youth aged 15 to 35 not in work and another third in unstable employment, and high population growth necessitates the creation of vast numbers of productive jobs while many workers remain in the informal sector facing low and volatile earnings. Financial experts say African countries can leverage artificial intelligence to boost youth employment by implementing localized training, promoting artificial intelligence innovation hubs, and integrating artificial intelligence into key sectors like agriculture and digital services. Key strategies include fostering public-private partnerships, expanding internet access, and adapting curricula to ensure artificial intelligence complements human labor. In the meantime, small and medium-sized enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa are also facing severe financial constraints, with over 50% requiring more funding than they can access. Key barriers include high collateral requirements, about 65%, exorbitant interest rates, about 55%, lack of critical or credit history, and poor financial literacy. These constraints, coupled with undeveloped financial markets, prevent small and medium-sized enterprises from scaling and driving high failure rates. In Cameroon, for instance, studies show that small and medium-sized enterprises face extremely high mortality rate within their first 5 years. Data indicates that about 80% of businesses created in Cameroon fail within their first 5 years of existence, with a significant portion failing within the first 2 to 3 years due to severe financial, managerial, and environmental constraints. And we are analyzing all of these issues and looking at the way out of this situation. Our guest today is a financial architect. Dr. Stanley FONGOD is a Cameroonian Pan-African scholar, entrepreneur, author, and religious leader known for building Africa's financial infrastructure. He holds 2 PhD degrees in finance and accounting. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Croston Fintech, also referred to as Croston, an enterprise focused on developing digital currency systems and digital financial rails across Africa. Dr. Stanley FONGOD is also a high-level mentor and referral source for rising African creative businesses. He regularly speaks on Pan-African platforms to advocate for economic transformation and the integration of digital currency across the continent. Dr. Stanley FONGOD, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Babla, for having me. This is truly a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us from Los Angeles in the United States. You're welcome to the program. Now, let's begin by having your analysis of the current situation of unemployment in Africa, notably or precisely in sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, I think one of the most amazing things, especially when we look at the continent of Africa, is that Africa in itself does not lack talent. Talent is plenty on the African continent. Africa is lacking systems, it's lacking infrastructure, it's lacking opportunity pipelines. One of Africa's biggest problems is that Africa is not ready. Systems are absolutely absent on the continent. You see, Africa currently has about 1.5 billion people. So by 2050, the population is projected to reach around 2.5 billion. That means by 2050, 1 of every 4 people on Earth will be African. So what this basically means is that we have what is commonly known on the continent as a very high youth unemployment, and poverty is rising. Here's the reason why. I think that if you look at where Africa is, and Africa has this young population, which is basically the youngest in the world, which is around 60% of Africa, is actually under the age of 25. Roughly about that should be about 10 to 12 million young Africans that will have to enter, the market every year. The problem is that our former economies are not creating jobs fast enough. So Africa is producing millions of young workers every year faster than the former economies actually have the capacity to be able to absorb them. That is where we stand. And there are a lot of things, series of things that it's happening that is bringing, a lot of these issues that we are facing on the continent. Maybe on top of that should be something like education, lack of tech infrastructures that can actually be able to prepare our young people for the job market that is in the 21st century. We have a plethora of issues, a buffet of them, just a cocktail of things that is happening, and we have to basically look at this carefully if we are trying to go to emerge out of this and allow our young people to compete with the rest of the world in this age of AI.
Give us an understanding of the fact that Africa is a very rich continent with huge quantities of natural resources in the different African nations, notably the sub-Saharan African nations, where we are really focusing in this edition of the program. And young people are lacking opportunities, as you said earlier. Is it really a problem of opportunities or a problem of management of the resources, of the openings that are available on the continent?
It's everything. And I think that, for example, our educational system is basically just a mismatch. We have an absolute, very not so great an economic and academic system, educational system that is supposed to prepare young people, for the economies of the world. We are not ready. We have too much, if you look at most of our educational systems, too much theory, no practical skills. We do not focus on entrepreneurship. Technology is basically missing. We don't talk much about finance. The digital space is totally absent. The only time anybody gets to talk about the digital space is when, they are on social media. So we are educating many young people for the job that no longer exists. And that was good back in the 70s. It was good back in the 80s. The 90s was okay. But by the time we got into the 2000s, we were basically scaling away from what has traditionally worked at the continent. And so what we have now is a whole new area. It's a whole new world. But the problem is the educational system on the continent of Africa has not caught up yet. So if you're asking me why is Africa the way it is, our educational system is a problem. We have the natural resources for sure, but what use is our national resources? We keep exporting a lot of everything that we have. We dig them up fine, we export them. Even those that we do farm, we export them. Outside of something like a gold, diamond, copper, iron, which we basically do not process any of that stuff on the continent. But if you look at something like cocoa, which, we are quite good at, on the continent of Africa, if you look at a country like Ivory Coast and Ghana, we probably produce about 60% of the world cocoa, 60%. There is a small community out here in America in a place called Pennsylvania, in the state of Pennsylvania. There's a little tiny city called Hershey, Pennsylvania. 20 years ago, I was actually in Hershey, 20-something years ago, about 24, 25 years ago, I was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I went to this particular city and got into the factory. There's a huge, gigantic factory in Hershey that produces chocolate. So one of the best chocolate brand in America is called the Hershey chocolate. If you want to know anything about how great, conversion is, you need to get the story of Hershey. The GDP of that particular city basically makes that of Ivory Coast looks like kids play, all right? And they decide what they will pay for cocoa in the world market. Why? Because all they do is get cocoa beans. They don't farm cocoa in the United States, even though we are trying to do that right on the West Coast. But nobody actually farms cocoa in the United States for commercial purposes. But the reality is that you have these conversions that is taking place, which we do not do on the continent of Africa, because we absolutely are a consumer base. We don't produce anything, but whatever we produce, we export, and then we receive the finished good, which in itself is not helping us. So we have very big industrialization so far as Africa is concerned. Africa imports too much and produces too little. So weak infrastructure is a problem. And again, with weak infrastructure, we should not even be talking about any kind of industrial expansion. That means a lot of things has to come together. Capital has to come together. We must be able to have electricity, power. We must be able to have infrastructure if we really want to scale our manufacturing sector. But of course, which is basically our industrialization, that in itself is missing. So the whole entire continent basically need an overhaul.
Right. If I get you right, the educational system of many African countries do not meet the exigencies of the era, the exigencies of the technology era. What should be done here?
Well, I think that we have to rely a whole lot more on trying to be able to teach our young people on what actually matters. We have to rewrite our curriculum and then let that curriculum be market ready, job ready. So you have to understand that in every single economy, the market speaks, right? So if you have a market that understands exactly, because the market will tell you what the market wants. And so if we look at the current trends of event around the world, look at the different economies, look at different countries that are doing quite well, look at countries like Kenya. Kenya is doing extremely well so far as tech is concerned. Ghana is absolutely doing great. Look at countries like Nigeria. There are so many fintechs operating in Nigeria that is basically, just a pride of the continent. But we need to be able to make sure we get young people who have the capacity to be able to work in these industries. And the only way for us to do that is to have an educational system that fully focuses on bringing young people into the job market ready. There's no need to teach people theory, all right, that absolutely have no bearing on anything. When I was growing up, I went to a polytech and I was able to study every single thing else that you could talk about, especially when it comes to electricity. I did electrical engineering, electronics, and we spent a lot of time repairing transformers, repairing electrical motors, and understanding its principles. I spent time with a very fine gentleman, in the village who was building welding machines, charging machines. He was manufacturing these things from scrap metals. I learned a lot from him. But when I got to America, there was no need for that because this environment had moved past that. So all of those basic stuff basically didn't mean anything. I went straight into Cisco. We have to be able to understand that while those knowledge is quite important to understand the basis of how things actually work, that does not help you to be able to get any kind of employment, and that will not scale in the kind of economies that we have now. We have to go to make sure we have young people who understand what is going on, educate them to be able to become useful within the sectors, that they find themselves working in, and also prepare them for the job market. Let them learn the trade. Let them learn things that is happening right now, either in technology, either in healthcare, whatever stuff it is. Let us be able to educate young people that will meet up with the demands that the market is actually presenting right now. The world is so diverse, all right, and information is spreading, and everyone is becoming a whole lot more smarter. We need to be, and obviously, businesses are finding ways in which they can basically reduce costs, become more profitable in the marketplace. We need young people who can actually be able to make that happen. And that will be in technology. That will be in tech. Either you're using technology in finance, like in Fintech, you're using technology in agriculture, you're using technology in manufacturing, or using technology in health. Whichever way it is, tech is leading the way, and we have to make sure that we embrace that fully.
Now, about the problem of unemployment, accusing fingers are pointing to the governments of the different African nations, the leaders. What do you think about the problem of governance, poor governance, corruption?
Africa has a unique problem, and I think that our level of corruption on the continent of Africa is a major problem. By the way, no nation has become wealthy by importing what it should be producing. And I think that needs to sink in a little bit longer in the minds of our young people and in the minds of those who are the political elites on the continent. We should be able to make sure that we treat, our countries, I'm talking to those who are leading, knowing my very well that we're living a legacy, we are building and trying as much as we can to make sure that whatever stuff we do, there's one mandate, one mission, one vision that basically states that this is what the country should be, and this is where we are taking the continent to. If you look at something like the Great Wall of China, it took over 2,000 years to construct the Great Wall of China, over 9 different dynasties. We're talking about a construction that began somewhere around the 7th century BC and ended around the 17th century BC. 2,000 years. And this is so remarkable because every other dynasty that came along understood what the mandate was, understood what the mission statement was, and did everything that they could to go to make sure that they complete what the previous dynasty had started. It was not about any single individual's achievement. It was about for the greater good and for the pride of the Chinese people. Today, when the world comes to see this beautiful monument that is called the Great Wall of China, it is a testament to 9 dynasties that had not met each other, but that understood what the mission was, that understood what the mandate was. What I find interesting on the continent of Africa is that we have people who absolutely have no desire for us on the continent to be this, a city that is nothing else but a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. We have most of the world resources. Africa, without Africa, as a matter of fact, technology around the world will basically crawl to a stop. We are fueling the next generations of AI systems with the national resources that we have on the continent of Africa. And it is quite shameful that we are talking about a continent that can barely keep our lights on, that we do not even have the capacity to generate stable and sustainable, electricity using all the natural resources that we have, either wind, hydro, nuclear. We have every single thing that we need on the continent, including solar. We have everything that we need on the African continent to produce energy and actually sell energy somewhere else if we could. We should, and I don't seem to understand exactly why we are where we are, apart from the fact that you have people who basically have been in power, who do not understand exactly how things work, who do not understand how systems work, and maybe they do, but just greed and the desire for people to basically be in positions of power and do not understand how to convert that to meaningful activity over so that young people around the continent can be able to, basically live better lives and leave better legacies, and also be able to see what we have done so that we can actually be able to help the next generation become everything that they're supposed to be. But now you have educated people who are all in the informal sector, and that in itself is just it's a big problem. If you look at the continent has over maybe 70 to 80% of all employment on the continent are folks who are in the informal sector, in the informal economy. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so that also means that whatever resources that the government should have received from taxation that was supposed to help us in our roads, was supposed to help us with infrastructure, that money is basically nowhere to be found. But except it doesn't even make any difference because the roads will not be constructed anyway. The infrastructures are basically not being handled the way they're supposed to be handled. So unfortunately, that's where we are.
Financial experts like you say that African countries can leverage artificial intelligence to boost youth employment. And of course, financial experts like you, as I said, are saying that African countries can leverage artificial intelligence to boost youth employment. We're looking at how that can be done and what can come out of that after the press review. Let's go to the newsstands, and we're looking at what the newspapers reported this week in Cameroon. The Voice reports that international lawyer and peace crusader Sir Dr. Ntumfo Barrister Nico Hale has called for a moral revolution ahead of the National Unity Day, May 20. He has decried corruption and discrimination as threat to the nation, urging Cameroonians to trade impunity for integrity. The Guardian Post: International Crisis Group warns Vice President position could worsen infighting among regime barons. Daily Voice reports the death of Anglophone leader Patrick Ndango. He died in detention. Cameroon echoes after Pope Leo XIV's visit. Death strikes key regime figures. The Advocate reports that after the public protest of Limbe-based mobile money operators following the killing of one of them The senior division officer of the FONGOD division has put in place measures to combat high crime wave. Another issue of the Guardian Post tells its readers that the Investment Promotion Agency has started a nationwide campaign to promote a new investment law and incentives. According to Municipal Update, the Bilingualism Commission has hailed strides made in the judiciary and security services in the use of official languages in the nation's capital, Yaoundé. Cameroon Insider writes that within the context of the fight against terrorism in the far north region of Cameroon and the Gulf of Guinea, Yaoundé and Washington have renewed the pact. The Dawn, veteran journalist Njomo Kevin passes on. The media landscape in Cameroon has been thrown into mourning following the passing of veteran journalist Njomo Kevin, who died in the west region of the country. And about the construction of the headquarters of the Cameroon Football Federation, FECAFOOT, the Guardian Post tells its readers that global football figures have congratulated the president of FECAFOOT, Samuel Eto'o. FIFA president says new building reinforces Cameroon's status as key player in African football. You're welcome back. We're still with our guest, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, a Cameroonian Pan-African scholar, entrepreneur, author, and religious leader known for building Africa's financial infrastructure. He holds two PhD degrees in finance and accounting, and he's joining us from Los Angeles in the United States. Doctor, now let's look at this issue concerning artificial intelligence. But before we go into the nooks and crannies of the issue, before we go into the details of the issue of how it can be leveraged to boost youth employment on the African continent, I want us to clear some doubts. When you talk to many Africans about artificial intelligence today, many are still saying that it has come to weaken human thinking capacity, human creative capacity. It has come to take away jobs and things like that.
Right. So if you're going to ask me if artificial intelligence is going to take away jobs, of course, there's a lot of jobs that will disappear. I mean, every job that is repetitive, clerical jobs, jobs that are, for folks who works like in data centers, those jobs will vanish. As a matter of fact, in America right now, people are no longer hiring those who just came out of schools as attorneys, as lawyers. And the reason for that is because, there are AI models that are doing a better job than any student out of the university who just graduated and got their license, as an attorney can do. So we absolutely must be able to, appreciate that, know that that is exactly what's happening. If you look, even with so far as artificial intelligence is concerned, a couple of, maybe like 3 months ago, I was somewhere I was being asked if I was going to advise somebody now about what to do so far as tech is concerned, what should they study? And I said they should study Python. And the reason why I said that is because ChatGPT, for example, what it uses in writing its program is actually Python. But if you fast forward that to today, frankly speaking, there is nobody who is actually working in that particular sector that is writing codes anymore. They just use, artificial intelligence to write the codes. They look at this stuff and that's it. So frankly, that job market is completely gone. It's gone. So we have to start looking. I think the question is, how do we use artificial intelligence to supplement or to help us with already existing models? How do we use artificial intelligence to help us, maybe set something up within the healthcare industry, set something up within, the finance industry? So we have to look at in agriculture. We have to look at that from that perspective. Before you go further, it's just the way it is.
Right. Before you go further to tell us that, let me get your thoughts about the idea, the perception that artificial intelligence has come to reduce, or better still, to kill human thinking capacity. There's still a lot of people who are having that perception of artificial intelligence as something that is not helping humans to be creative, to think and do things themselves.
So, right. The problem, and this is the studies that actually just came out a couple of weeks ago with artificial intelligence, is that the people who actually spend a lot of time using ChatGPT, for example, these large language models, what they discovered was the fact that they actually, a part of their brain that is actually used for critical thinking, for example, basically got suppressed within that period, which means that they are getting dumber by the day. So when you basically allow your thinking to artificial intelligence, that's where the problem is. There has to be a way in which you do a little bit more differently. That means you use artificial intelligence to help you understand stuff and then to supplement your knowledge, do the critical thinking. It is very important that you do the critical thinking. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, there was a gentleman who basically showed up in the U.S. Congress talking about that in this in our civilization, every generation has been better than the previous generation. All right. So every new generation is better than the previous generation, except for this now generation, which is basically the Gen Zs. Their level of intelligence is way lower than the previous generation. And that was attributed to social media. And there's a lot to be said about the time we spend with our screens that basically reduces our ability for critical thinking. There is something that has to be said about you basically using your brain. If you look at what is happening right now, especially just go on social media and see people who are posting this very long, lengthy write-ups, and you look at it, all of those things are AI generated. Nobody's using their brain anymore to say anything. I'm a writer, right? I spend so many days, in the year actually writing. I used to write for people as a ghostwriter. And one of the beauty about writing is this thing about language, where you're able to have this artistic nature where you take words, you put them in such a way that you can be able to invoke certain emotions. You think about it carefully. You spend a little bit more time refining the sentence, trying to find words that basically brings out the thing you're really trying to be able to transmit. Can I be able to catch your attentions in ways that basically make you feel emotional by the time you read what I have to say? Unfortunately, you don't find that anymore, but you have just generic things that people are posting that looks like it's one person that wrote them. So we have to be able to understand, yes, for sure, artificial intelligence is going to make a lot of people get dumber, but a lot of people will be smarter as well.
So the problem is not with artificial intelligence, but with irresponsible or wrong use of artificial intelligence. Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So people shouldn't use artificial intelligence as if it's a human substitute doing the job, doing everything for them.
You should not do that. There has to be a way in which you basically, try to understand something that you're trying to get at, and that it will be able to give a lot of different citations, synthesize information from different areas, and then bring everything to you so that you can understand certain concepts fully. That is exactly how this thing is supposed to be done. And it's not so you cannot suspend your thinking to a particular machine and allow it to think for you, and then you stop thinking. That is not useful. There's no utility in that. If you're going to have any kind of utility to be in the marketplace, another way for you to know exactly, how dumb we have become is that you have people who basically write very well, who you see them write very well because they use these models, and then by the time you listen to them talk, you ask yourself, there is a big gap between what you write and the way you talk. You are so good in writing, but by the time you're communicating, you basically empty. There are no materials in the way you communicate. Reasons being, you suspended your thinking to an AI model, and now you're in real life, you're being questioned, you're being asked questions, you need to do a presentation, and there's nothing to offer.
So now tell us, how can African countries go about leveraging artificial intelligence to boost youth employment?
it's going to be a long journey. So there is nothing Africa can do right now to say, I'm trying to be able to help with the unemployment issues that we have on the continent, and then I'm going to use artificial intelligence. Just like, for example, look at the government of Cameroon. If the government of Cameroon comes out today and say, I'm trying to be able to basically help with the unemployment issues, and this is what I need to do, that still will not help. What needs to happen so far as unemployment is concerned is that we must, on the continent of Africa, create jobs. And how do we create jobs? We allow the private sector to be incentivized enough to be able to do what the private sector does, which is basically create industries that do hire people. That is how we basically talk about creating employment. But when you come into a particular country, you have people on the streets who are in the informal sector that start screaming and shouting that the government is not doing enough. And then the government comes around and says they're going to hire 200,000 people, and then we're celebrating. That basically means you do not really understand how things work. The 200,000 people that the government is employing, somebody needs to pay them. Do you know who is paying them? The people who are paying them will be people in the formal sectors. It will be folks who basically are shipping things into the country. That will be as a result of taxes and custom duties. That will be, I mean, they're going to tax you no matter what. That will be at the pump. When you want to fuel your car, you're paying taxes. That is as a result of all these massive people that have just been hired by the government to do nothing. The government is not a for-profit. The government is actually an NGO. It's run like a church. You have to be able to get people into the for-profit sector, which is basically, folks who are in the private sector, so they can be able, to generate enough income, generate enough capital, allow other people to, and bring in other people into their mix by hiring them, and then there you have young people who will be leaving some of those companies to create their own. So if you look at what is happening in Nigeria, for example, within the fintech space, look at all the fintechs that are in Nigeria. Somebody was somewhere and then they left to create their own. That is how the private sector works. We must be able to push for job creation within the private sector, not within the government. I don't think that the public sector has anything to offer. We must rely on the private sector. Then we can start talking about how we can bring people or young people in. There are things to be done, yes, but we need to industrialize. We need to go to make sure that the private sector is doing quite well. And then secondly, in the public sector, artificial intelligence will be very useful, especially in making sure that we mitigate the issues of fraud. Something like blockchain technology should be something that every single government on the continent of Africa should be able to use. We need to know who is signing these contracts. We need to know who basically collected contracts to do what. We need to understand exactly where the money was spent, and that is traceable within a decentralized system like a blockchain where you can only, where you really cannot change anything. I think that we need to be able to employ this and then use artificial intelligence in fintech in places like custom, in places like taxation, to be able to make sure that we laser in on where the money is coming from, who is paying, who is not paying, who is using, where money is going to. All of that stuff can be used with artificial intelligence, and also in the hospital setup, maybe in agriculture as well. But we need the infrastructures for us to start using artificial intelligence. It will not work without structures. It will not work without the infrastructure to which it is that we employ them. You're not going to have robots sitting on the streets of Douala asking us, what do you want me to do?
And it will also require the will, human will, because with the high levels of corruption and embezzlement on the continent, with the high levels of malpractices in the government circles of the different African nations, there's going to be a lot of resistance to something like blockchain technology, which will definitely close all the doors, all the openings for corruption and embezzlement of public funds.
Well, there are ways to do that, and I think that one of the things I am doing right now, especially with our company, is to find ways in which we can actually help governments, not from a more confrontational perspective, but to basically just actually show them exactly how we can actually be able to help, them, make money, so that we can use that for infrastructure. I understand exactly what you're saying. But at some particular point in time, you probably might need to wake somebody up like TB Joshua and say, maybe you need to lay hands on some people, because frankly speaking, it's like there's some folks who basically are just not born to do right. They were not created to do right. They were born, to just inflict as much pain as they could. So that's the hand we have been dealt. We will not complain about it. We're not going to cry about it. We will innovate. We will move, and we will find ways to make things better. And frankly speaking, there's really absolutely no time anymore left for us to basically start talking about what things could have done. When the internet showed up, a lot of nations basically got onto it, and they became better. Nations like India. We were almost at the same time, Africa and India, basically we were experiencing the same things. But if you look at India today, and with the Internet of all things and how much it changed its society, you will realize that there's a whole lot more that should be done so far as Africa is concerned. And yet we are better than India in every single metric. Unfortunately, this is what is happening. So we have to go to find ways in which we tell ourselves, if we miss the Internet of all things, if we miss the Internet revolution, if we miss the blockchain revolution, now that AI is here, we are no longer wait for the political elites to tell us exactly how to do things. We are going to show up and do things, especially when we have systems that are quite decentralized. When we have AI systems, we can be able to start doing that in the private sector. And believe me, it's just a matter of time before the public sector catches up.
Give us your perspective of the school of thought suggesting that African countries can leverage artificial intelligence to boost youth employment by implementing localized training, promoting artificial intelligence innovation hubs, and integrating artificial intelligence into key sectors like agriculture and digital services.
Okay, so that's true and that's good. And so the first thing first is that we need to be able to talk about a lot of internet access on the continent of Africa. Artificial intelligence is running on very heavy systems. So we need to be able to first of all start thinking about how we build our own models on the continent of Africa rather than relying on models that is actually outside of the continent of Africa. So far as AI is concerned, it is literally an arm race, and he who wins in AI will control the world, for thousands of years. It's just the way it is. So there is a massive competition between the US and China, and the only person who is sitting on the sideline and has always been on the sideline, who is basically making sure that China and America compete because we are the one providing to them the raw materials, is Africa, and Africans are absolutely doing nothing about it. We have folks on the continent that are, it's quite shameful. I mean, you know what, I'm hopeful anyway, but we need to be able to make sure that we have electricity. Penetration, of electricity into rural areas will be paramount. Having electricity, that is quite stable will absolutely be paramount. We need to have data centers that can be able to run these AI models and have data centers that have the capacity to do so. Unfortunately, on the continent, and especially in Cameroon, we do not have any of that. We can hardly keep our on. So we must be able to innovate. Secondly, we must be able to make sure that we have internet penetration into the rural areas as well, and also have a way in which we have these e-learning platforms where we allow young people to have access to education that they do not need to have internet to do so. I have propose different scenarios that we can use. I mean, I don't know exactly what we're doing, but I propose different scenarios that we can use, especially in Cameroon, that will allow anyone who is going to school to be able to find themselves learning things, especially on AI, on blockchain, on Internet of all things, on entrepreneurship, without using the internet. As long as you have access to a cell phone tower, you have access to this platform and you can be educated. So we have the technology, we have the skill sets, we have the know-how. It's just a matter of us basically making sure that we bring all of this stuff together. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's wonderful, but we need to give young people access to the platforms we are talking about.
And the unfortunate thing as we speak now is that many African countries are still lacking behind in terms of internet access and electric energy supply. Cameroon, for example, just moved from Eneo to Socadel, the company that is charged now with the production and distribution of electric energy in the country, and there are hopes that things are going to change. But the situation is quite bad as we speak right now. From the major cities to the hinterlands, there are problems of electric energy. Electric energy is poorly supplied. Many areas have gone for months and even years, and some have never had electric energy at all. Neighboring Nigeria is having serious problems with inadequate electric energy supply. Many other African countries, we are really hoping that things are going to change in that perspective for things to for the continent to move forward. And we're not talking about that today. Now, let's talk about artificial intelligence in agriculture. I want to go specific on agriculture because this is the backbone of many African economies. And as of now, agriculture on the African continent is pretty much at the primary level, cultivation, and then everything is exported. Practically no transformation is taking place in many countries. A lot of what is produced on the African continent are simply exported as raw material. Now, how can African countries leverage on artificial intelligence to, first of all, step up agricultural production? Because even production is still very low. Many African countries, including Cameroon, are exporting a lot of things that they can produce. Importing a lot of things that they can produce, like rice. Some are even importing maize, importing palm oil, importing, things that they can produce here in Cameroon, here on the continent. How to leverage on artificial intelligence to boost production, to step up transformation.
Right. So, by the way, before I answer that question, you're talking about electricity in Cameroon. I was quite. I kept laughing because of the mockery I saw online. We used to be Sonel. We left Sonel to AS Sonel, I think, and then we got to Eneho. Is it Eneo? And then now we are. How did you call it again? Socadel, right?
Socadel.
We are now at what we call Socadel, and I was laughing because I have this lamb. I hope you guys can see this. I have this lamb, and I saw that somebody was telling me that their logo or something had to do with the lamb, and I was telling myself, you can change the name all you want. The reality is that it doesn't really matter. The reason why it doesn't matter is because the reasons why we do not have electricity will have to remain, except that we change our infrastructure. And so there's a lot of things that needs to happen for that to for us to be able to fix that. Then, so far as artificial intelligence is concerned, I think that so in places like agriculture, I farm in America. Once I finish with you, today's Friday, I'm heading to the farm. I run an avocado farm. And so in farming, we use a lot of AI systems. Our irrigation system is actually being controlled by AI. So we have a sensor in the ground that will tell us exactly what the humidity of the soil is. And based upon that, our sensors will now send a signal, to our water control valves that will release a certain amount of water. And once the sensor senses that it's okay, then the valves will shut up. So the notion of actually trying to be able to go in water and you're basically looking for just how the plant is behaving, that stuff is gone. And what research has shown is that yield has become better. You don't have to really worry about a lot of that so far as Cameroon is concerned. We are living in the country that is privileged based upon our geography, where we are. We have everything that it takes, especially up north and in the south, to be able to have all the climate necessary to mass produce so that we can actually be able to not just feed the countries that are surrounding us, but to actually feed the world. We have that unique capacity in Cameroon. And by the time we start employing artificial intelligence in basically looking at ways in which we can actually be able to increase on our crop yield, that will be the game changer. But then we also need to be able to bring young people to understand that agriculture is for the uneducated. Agriculture is not for those stupid. All right? I'm educated, I think. But creator of life, and I'm farming. I love farming. There is something about farming that basically gets you into a place that calms you down and teaches you about values.
Permit me to interrupt you a little bit.
That's what we need.
Permit me to interrupt you a little bit, please. There were some connection issues there, and I didn't get what you said some few seconds ago. You said you are educated. Of course, you have 2 PhD degrees in finance and accounting, and you're farming.
So I'm farming. And you need to see me hold a chainsaw, cutting down a tree, okay, and then digging a hole, connecting pipes, trying to make sure that whatever has been broken, you know, irrigation system should work. We're doing the hard work, all right? There's value in that. There's absolutely nothing in that. And then by the time I'm done with that, I will be at the data center, you know, making sure that, you know, servers remain up and doing whatever stuff I need to do and still be able to work on fintech applications. We're doing every single thing else. When all is said and done, and this is to the African, when the minerals are gone, when the oil is gone, when all of that natural resources that we have is gone, the only thing that will be left is the land. And you better know what to do with it. And again, you also have to make sure that we allow Chinese companies to show up in places like Cameroon and basically, you know, destroy our land and just render them totally unproductive in places like Betty in the eastern part of the country, a place I know in Betua, a place I know very well. We have to be able to understand that long after those mining expeditions are over, we will have to farm the land. And so somebody has to feed someone. Please, let's make sure we protect our environment at all costs. Farming is noble.
Farming is noble, and now you're suggesting that African nations, or you're saying that African nations should use artificial intelligence to boost production and even quality, in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, and of course, in terms of speed and efficiency in agricultural production.
Absolutely, absolutely. The most amazing thing is that if you look at our metadata, you're looking at data from many sources. For example, you have a data for one thing, another data for another. But if you have a look at the metadata perspective, you have an artificial model that can actually be able to look at data from different particular plants, different varieties of plant based upon climate, based upon a lot of data points. That particular model can be able to predict and give us the best crop type, the best type of fertilizer, the best type of pesticides that we can be able to use so that we can increase, you know, our yield and obviously increase the quality of product, the quality of produce that we are actually farming. That is something that we did not have, you know, just a couple of years ago. It would take a whole entire company to run all kinds of research models, and it will be costly, more expensive, but you can do all of that stuff with a click of a button with an artificial intelligence platform like Cloud AI. You can just be able to do that stuff and you get all the metric, every single thing else from a very complicated, huge database. You know, you can actually be able to synthesize that, get every single thing else that you want and know exactly what to do with less than a minute. That is remarkable.
Right, let's take a short break. Time for us to bring to you interviews of the week right now. And when we come back, we're discussing the challenges faced by small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa, particularly financial constraints. We're looking at the challenges and how to solve those challenges, how to provide solutions, how to remedy the situation. Stay with us. We'll be right back in a moment.
We must take the lead as Africans, as policymakers, as private sector leaders in taking charge of our own development. Any other support we get from friends like Macron and other people will be secondary. To answer your question, we will not allow ourselves again to be slaves of anybody. We are going to take charge of our own future. We will not allow ourselves to be exploited again, because we know what we must do. And what we are saying is we don't want to also blame others for our own mistakes. President Kagame told us today that nobody owes us development. We owe it to our own selves. So we mustn't look for favors where we can do it ourselves.
You know, in Africa, majority of our population, they are below 30.
Yeah.
More than 70%.
What are the reflections, when you think about that, what are your reflections?
My reflection is that the future is Africa. When you now sit down, you reflect where we are today.
And what needs to happen for the future to be Africa?
A heavy investment in infrastructure, in training, education first, because you have to work with an educated society, of which a lot of the governments, they are putting average of by 15, some of them even 20% of their budget into education. You know, because we have to upskill to make sure that, yes, we are producing the workers that we need for tomorrow.
What are the most promising countries from that point of view?
The promising countries: Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda is small, but it's very, very promising. You have Egypt is promising. Algeria is also promising, even though they are not very open. So there are more than 10 very good countries in Africa that can go and invest. Ghana is doing extremely well. Côte d'Ivoire, which is you know, in West Africa, they are doing extremely very well. Even Guinea, today you look at the mines that was just opened by Rio Tinto, which cost over $20 billion. You know, so people are coming in now. They realize that, yes, Africa is open for business, and people are ready to go into these sectors.
And who is helping Africa with business now? Can you just reflect a bit on China versus the US versus Europe?
Honestly, Nicola, you want me to be very open?
Totally.
Yeah, so it's China. China really have dominated business in Africa.
And how do
because of the absence of the others. They are dominating the landscape.
Right, you're welcome back. We're now looking at the challenges faced by small and medium-sized enterprises. Many of the enterprises are facing financial constraint, causing a high rate of mortality, so to speak, high rate of failure. Many of the companies, according to statistics, die within an average period of 3 to 5 years. What is your analysis of this problem, Dr. Stanley FONGOD?
Well, look, it's a general problem everywhere, and I think that the only reasons why we are talking about Africa is because, you know, it's our backyard. In America, most businesses that start fail within the first 3 years. It's just the way it is. In America, about more than 80% of them, they will fail. So the problem is not about failing. The problem is about what happens when they fail. In America, they can't. And what you make sure that, you know, if you fail, you probably will be able to try again. In Africa, the capital even have capital in the first place. So imagine you went into a bank and you tell the bank that you have an idea. You are not even a small to medium-sized enterprise yet. You have not building, you have not done anything. You just have an idea. They will look at you and then they will laugh at you. They'll be like, "What are you talking about?" And then you say, "You want to borrow money?" Then, well, they'll give you this very lengthy list of things you need to bring. On top of that will be collateral, and the collateral is so outrageous that if you actually had that collateral, you will not be coming to the bank in the first place. And when they collect your collateral, then they will tell you, they'll give you something that is even more outrageous. They will tell you about your interest rate. I was in Nigeria, I did a research in Nigeria, and I discovered that the Central Bank of Nigeria is actually lending money to the banks in Nigeria at the tune of 28%. I understand exactly what that is, and for that is basically to be able to work on inflation. So they're reducing the money supply. I get that. But the problem is that when the bank basically collects the money from the central bank and have to lend that money to those who are small to medium-sized enterprises, they do so at the tune of 32%. Now, put that into perspective. There's a guy in America whose name is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is the best in the world so far as trading is concerned. His investment portfolio is outstanding. This guy makes yearly between 18 to 22% yearly. Between 18 to 22% yearly. He beats the S&P 500. That only makes between 9 to 12%. Now, so what you're telling me is, I'm going to walk into a bank and the bank will tell me that I have to pay 32% interest rate. That means the bank assumes that I'm better than Warren Buffett. It's only in Africa that you see this level of, madness. It's only on the continent. But unfortunately, that's where we are. And so capital is expensive on the continent, and the opportunities are really not there for folks with ideas. Multi-medium-sized enterprises cannot even scale. They cannot sell outside of their zones. We have all kinds of limitations. We have to be able to address this and find ways in which we can bring capital into the continent. And I'm a big time proponent of the fact that, and this is my thesis, that what is happening so far as Africa is concerned is not that Africa does not have money. I think that there's a lot of money that Africa actually do have, and there's a lot of money in Africa that can be reinvested in Africa, but Africa is missing something. Africa has a trust problem, and capital only goes where it's trustworthy. Capital will never go where it doesn't feel safe.
Now you're the CEO. You are the founder and chief executive officer of Croston Fintech, also refers to as Croston, an enterprise focusing on developing digital currency systems and digital financial rails across Africa. How can digital currency systems and the digital financial rails that you are establishing across Africa help in this situation, notably to create more access or facilitate or ease access to financing, funding for small and medium-sized enterprises?
Well, we have to reimagine money. We have to reimagine how we talk about money, and we have to be able to also find ways in which whatever we reimagine must be able to be backed up with something other than hype. So if you look at something like Bitcoin, it's all hype. Bitcoin is all talk. It's all hype. So people trust Bitcoin because it was the first in the marketplace. But Bitcoin, basically, its value is on emotions. If people wake up tomorrow and they hear some bad news concerning anything that has to do with digital currency, then the value of Bitcoin starts dropping. Why? Because people start selling. When people dump, it's called dumping. When people start selling, then the value goes down. When people start buying, the value goes up. So it runs daily on, on sentiment. We need to be able to have some form of money that is foundation in what money has always been foundation on real commodity, like gold. Gold has this intrinsic value that will never change. So if you look at gold, the quantity of gold that we have in the world is pretty much standard. That means the kind of gold that Mansa Musa touched is still here. The gold that was in the hands of men like Solomon in scripture is still here. The gold that people like Antoinette, in France touch is still here. So if you look at all the gold that has ever been mined, apart from those that have been used in spacecraft, some of which we will never recover, all of that gold is here. The cluster abundance of gold in the earth crust is known, which means there are no alchemy for gold. Alchemy simply means we cannot create gold out of other materials in the lab. But you can do that with diamonds. That's called mesorite. You can actually use carbon and then create fake diamonds or lab-grown diamonds. But you cannot do that with gold. So if you really wanted to have a commodity to be used as money, gold would be that one commodity that you use, which means that its supply in the market will be standard. There will not be any dumping of that in the market, which is always a problem when you look at the fiat money. If you look at the amount of money that the United States of America is printing, the dollar that he has printed since 2024, it is outstanding. They have double or triple the volume of money since the creation of the United States of America in 5 years. that doesn't make any sense. From 1 trillion to about 3 trillion, that doesn't make any sense. But it is what is happening. So we must be able to make sure that we have something on the continent that basically ties to what we already have on the continent in abundance, which is basically gold. That's why something like Croston Fintech, which is basically, it has this Croston coin, which is 100% backed by gold. Why is this important? It's important because in areas in Africa where a lot of people are unbanked, we have to look for alternative methods so that we can actually be able to bring people to participate in the economy. And I think that we're already doing that with mobile money, but we need to go further so that we can have other currencies can be accepted outside of the continent or outside of the areas where mobile money exists. And I think that to have a decentralized platform that is operating on the blockchain is the window, is the gateway, to reaching people all across the world that can actually also be able to participate in basically, promoting, funding small to medium-sized enterprises on the continent, on a decentralized platform that does not have to have all these heavy regulations and just allow people to make money, have real conversions, and then have real goods and services travel, endlessly across the continent and across the world. And secondly, and lastly, we need to also make sure that we have free trade zones on the continent. There's a reason why producing a stick in Cameroon and I can't sell in Nigeria, or I need a visa to go to Nigeria, or need a visa to go to Central African Republic, or a visa to go anywhere else. I understand these nations are visa free for now, but look at somebody who is in Ghana, or somebody who is in South Africa, or somebody who is in places like Kenya. We need to be able to have visa-free, for all Africans, especially to allow goods and services to freely flow on the continent. That will make, our lives a whole lot easier.
And we're going to wrap up with this issue about a borderless Africa. But before I have your comments on the issue concerning borderless Africa, let me know what you think about the problem of financing of terrorism. Terrorism is a major problem on the African continent, and there are fears that promoting digital currency could promote, or better still, enhance the financing or facilitate the financing of terrorism, because digital currencies are not as much as controlled as the physical currency.
Right. So, there has to be a hybrid solution where we understand exactly how to do it, who is authorized to do what. We must have a hybrid solution. I've also never believed that every single thing can just be like that. Reasons being, we must also be able to make sure that we support our government by being honorable in paying taxes, because those are needed for better infrastructure so far as the continent is concerned, or our individual countries are concerned. Unfortunately, if you look at what is happening on the African continent so far as terrorism is concerned, most of the money that is being coming into support terrorist groups is actually coming out of the Middle East. That's what the report says. So if you look at places like the Sahel, if you look at countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, what is happening is that you have terrorist groups that are floating from places like Libya, which has become a free-for-all for all terrorist groups roaming through the Greater Maghreb. And they are coming out there, just creating havoc in these, Sahelian countries. We have to be able to fight that by making sure that we cut off funding and then meet up with the right people that has the capacity to be able to do so. But unfortunately, the only time the world basically flexes its muscle is when it has everything to do with the world, except on the continent of Africa. We know that. And that is why I'm a big proponent that one of the biggest failures of the continent of Africa is the EU. So far as I'm concerned, I think that the EU is no longer useful. I think that we need to basically, do away with the EU. We need something else to replace the EU.
You mean the African Union? Failure. You mean the African Union, right? The AU, the African Union.
Yes, the African Union.
All right, very quickly, please let me have your thoughts about the idea of a borderless Africa, an African continent where goods and people can move freely from north to south, east to west.
Africa's greatest problem is really not that the continent has experienced a lot of issues so far as colonialism is concerned. That has not been our major problem. The problem we've had has been our geography. If you look at the continent of Africa, you'll realize that most of our major developing cities are actually along the coast. What is happening is that the coastal cities have had access to trade for thousands of years. They have had access to trade for hundreds of years. And so if you look at cities like Johannesburg, Douala, Lagos, Accra, those are cities that have developed just as a result of trade, Mombasa, all those cities. But interland has been a different story. Our terrain, interland, is a problem. So we need to create railway systems that interconnect the continent so that we can start talking about moving goods and services across the continent. Railways that move from places like Dakar in Senegal and then move all the way to places like Nairobi in Kenya. We are talking about railways from places like Tunisia all the way down to South Africa. We must crisscross the continent if we really want to move goods and services across the continent. We have to trade within Africa, not just talking about trading outside of Africa. That will be the biggest push, and that's what we need going forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, for your time. Thank you for joining us in this very important conversation today.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you. Thank you very, very much for having me.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today. God bless Africa. Goodbye.